So there are a few chapters in the gospel, a few verses about how Jesus interacts with children. And hopefully, just like we're doing today, he always welcomes children to come to him. Even when the disciples are kind of, stern and want the children to leave him alone and kind of sit down and be quiet, Jesus is never like that. He's always inviting the children to come be with them. And so in this chapter 18 comes just after a few other important stories. Jesus, just before this, had told his followers that if they had but the faith of a mustard seed, then they could do everything he can do, so that they can be just like him if they have just the smallest bit of faith. So they don't have to be exactly like him, but if they have that, they can do these wondrous things. And then just after that, he warns them that he's about to die. And he tells them, okay, I'm going to be betrayed, and I'm going to die, and on the third day, I'm going to come back. But the disciples don't know what to make of it, and they're upset. And so they sound pretty upset then, but just after that, we have this. And I think it's kind of funny. So they come to him and they say, okay, so who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And they're talking about amongst themselves. So he just told them he's going to die, and they're like, yes, that's very, very sad. But who of us is the best? Really, let's focus on the important things here. We want to know who's the best. So we've been arguing amongst ourselves. And you see this show up in other gospels. So who gets to sit on your right hand? Who gets to follow after you? He just said he's going to be betrayed. But they're like, no, we never do that. I'm the best. Really, I should get to be in the kingdom of heaven with you. So they're not really listening to him, I don't think. That always comes up. I had a professor who said, especially if you read Mark, you wouldn't want to be a disciple if you're in the Gospel of Mark. They're just constantly missing everything Jesus is saying. He tells them exactly what's going to happen, and then they're confused. And they walk away and they go back to being how they are. And so, they're arguing amongst themselves about who's the greatest. And the Greek word that's used for this is meson, and it means greater or larger or stronger. So you're thinking not very small and childlike, but who's kind of big and strong. And they want to know who's going to be like that in the kingdom of heaven. And so they come to him so he can settle it. And of course, he could have said himself, that be like me, and whoever's the most like me will be the biggest and strongest. But he doesn't. Instead, he sees a child here, and he says, here, come here. I could use you for this. And he says, be like this. So be the way the children are. And that's how you're going to be the greatest in heaven. And then the word that's used there, where he says, unless you change and become like children, it's the Greek word is strophet, which means to turn or convert. And you always hear this in the Hebrew Bible, the idea of we have to turn. Don't turn from the ways of God, or you must turn so you can be in the way of God. So he's saying we have to turn from this. So turn from our competitive ways and become like children again. And so I find that very interesting. So they're I think they're still in the world of strength and power that everyone else was in the time of the Roman Empire, and that sadly I think we're in now. So who has the most credentials, who sounds like they're the most holy, who seems like they have it all together. So how do we do that? And he says, you don't do it like that. You do it by letting go of all of that. How do we let go and become like we were when we were children again? And I think that's true in a few ways. So especially at this time, if you figure children didn't have any rights. So if this is a very hierarchical society, the children are not the ones you would want to be in this. They don't have much power or much say in how things are going. But he says, rather than trying to be like the kings or the emperors, you want to be like a child. You want to let go and not be so focused on your rights and how much power you have. But also I think about just the presence of children and how children are in the world and how they're fully focused on kind of what's in front of them. So I've been teaching compassionate listening for a long time, and we use something like this actually in our teaching. Where sort of the idea, and some of you who studied with me, you might remember this. So we draw this picture that I really like, and it has a heart in the center of it. And it says, think about how kids are, and what are some of the qualities that kids have. And you have openness and joy and curiosity and very much living in the moment. And you have love, and you also do have competitiveness. Ironically, when I was working on this, my kids were fighting in the other room. And I was thinking, well, it's not that kids aren't competitive about who's the best, because they are. But there's no guile, right? They're just fully present. They're fully themselves. So if you think about how we are when we're like that, so in the compassionate listening model, all of us are born that way. We start out like that. But then we get hurt. So when things happen to us and people discriminate against us, or they betray us, or they treat us badly, or they tell us we're not worthy, or we're not good enough, or we're doing things wrong, and the more that happens, it kind of condenses that heart space, and we grow smaller, and we feel less able to access that, less comfortable being like children in the world because it's too painful and too scary. So then we build kind of a wall around ourselves to protect us from that. So now instead of being in that vulnerable heart space, we always draw like a castle around ourselves. And so we become sarcastic, and we kind of load up on achievements and things to kind of prove that we deserve goodness in the world. And we kind of shut ourselves down. We might become depressed or apathetic. And we do all that, and we build that castle so we can protect that core of who we are. But then the problem is we're not interacting with each other in that heart space. We're interacting as castles. So we're kind of running around, and the castle version of me is running into the castle version of you. And it's even worse because I think that castle version of you is the real you. But it's not. It's the version you built up to protect yourself. But then I'm interacting with you that way, and I'm like, oh, that person, they don't care about anything. They only care about themselves. Or they're such a jerk. They're so full of pride. They think they know everything. And I think that's the real them. But that isn't. All of us started out like children. None of us started out that way. But we became that way to protect ourselves. But then I'm not really finding the authentic you, and you're not really finding the authentic me. And that's how we create so many of the problems in our lives. It's in Buddhism, there's the pain, and then the suffering is the pain added on. And this is how we have the pain added on, is through the castle version of ourselves. So I think that's what Jesus is talking about here when he says, let go of that. Like, you don't need that. You don't need to be that kind of built up, greatest version of yourself. The greatest version of you, the biggest, strongest version of you, is the version when you're just authentic. When you just say, you know what, that really hurt. Or, I don't really know what to do right now in this situation. Or, I'm struggling with something. I have something in my life that I don't really know how to deal with it. Or maybe I'm just starting school, or I'm starting something new, and I'm not sure the best path to take, or I'm kind of scared about that. And you can be that way. I would hope in a faith community we can all be that way, that heart, present, original version of ourselves, and have that be okay. And I think that's the kind of community Jesus is calling us to. The French philosopher Paul Ricoeur, he says you start with the first naivete, where you say God is love. And kind of when you first learn the teachings, you're like, okay, I'm in that kind of place, that I'm kind of reading it and I understand it this way. But as we become adults, we get all confused. Richard Rohr says we start out with order, and then we have disorder. Where we're like, I don't know, some of these things, maybe there's more of a history to it, or I tried to live that way and then I got hurt and that seems like not a good idea. Maybe I can't live that way anymore. So then it's no longer working. But Paul Ricoeur says we want to come back to the second naivete, where you study all of this, and then you come back and you're like, you know what? God is love, actually. I've studied for years and I believe God is love. Or there's the reordering that Richard Rohr says. So even though you have moments of disorder and moments where you're like, this isn't working in my life, I'm not sure what to do, that you can come back and be like, you know what? The way that children are, that is the way to be. I want to be honest like that. I want to be authentic like that. I don't want to feel like I have to protect myself and load up and try to prove how worthy I am. I don't want to do that after all. And so I hope in a faith community, that's what we can do for one another. And I think that's why it's so important that Mary and I were doing this kind of service, so we can be like, when we say, whoever you are, you're welcome here, that's true. Even if you're my kids and you're fighting in the front when I'm trying to sound serious, and even if you're running around and you're wiggling and you're on the floor playing with stuffed animals, then you're welcome here, really wherever you are. And that's the authentic version of you. So never feel like when you come on Sundays, you have to be different or better or some other version of yourselves. Please bring who you are in with you. And just know that those seated around you have brought who they are in with them as well. And because of that, all are always welcome. Amen.